Hello, everybody. We're going to try this again. Hopefully we can get audio. I've got EC Saulness in here, or I'm going to invite him in here to join us and chat about his book that will be coming out. It is called The Pack. I'm going to let him talk about it a little more. Hopefully we have sound when that happens. All right, let's see. Hi.
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes! Yay!
Yeah, figured it out. Okay.
Success! All right, and only 14 minutes late. That's
It's
okay.
okay. You had me considering a new career in mind.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're here, Eric. I'm so excited. First and foremost, let's have you tell us a little bit about the book that you are releasing next Tuesday.
Oh, this book right here? This one?
That book right there, that's
Yeah,
the one.
doesn't exist yet. Next Tuesday, like you said. Well, it's called The Pack. It's a bit of a werewolf, hard-boiled noir detective thriller way to work through my personal trauma kind of pastiche. You know, the usual.
I love that.
Thank you.
Um, and so can you give us maybe a little synopsis about what it's about, maybe a little bit about the main character?
Sure. The synopsis bit always tricks me because it's essentially two books. I have a lot of time jumping going
Oh,
on.
okay.
If you're a nerd of the Gen X variety like myself, who grew up with shows like Highlander and things, where you constantly jump back to flashbacks and see what someone was like when they were younger a long time ago, being a supernatural character, Frank, the main character, is experiencing a story in the 1990s, which is when I grew up, and therefore is the best time ever. But he himself is from the World War I era. And so we've jumped back and forth a lot. It alternates. It's sort of a shuffled story. So younger him, current him, back and forth. And I had to try and tie both stories together in a satisfying way at the end, which I hope I did. I think so.
I bet you did.
I've been told
That's
that
amazing.
I did, but people are nice, so I don't know.
Wonderful. So his story takes place partially in the 90s and then partially during World War One. And there is a little secret about him, which is that he is a werewolf.
No, not the best kept secret. It's on the cover. But yes.
Yeah, just maybe a little secret. So
Kind of leads with that.
in regards to kind of that werewolf side of the story, what kind of research into werewolf folklore, mythology, if any, did you have to do in order to write this story?
If any. I think I left half my soul in those rabbit holes. There's so many bits of weird folklore that no one pays attention to in current werewolf lore at all, and some that got made up by Hollywood or transplanted from vampire lore or other things, and just our current idea, like Silver, that's just a complete invention of like the Wolfman era.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like for vampires and such. So kind of threw that out, replaced it with my own thing. But definitely there's lots of references to that because, if you were to suddenly become a werewolf yourself, you'd want to dig into the lore, right? And it'd be pretty confusing. So I'm working on somebody right now with an audiobook version of this, which I'm very excited about. I got the first two chapters today and it sounds awesome, but he's constantly checking with me. How do you say this word? I'm like, I don't know, man, it's Hungarian.
I love that. Yes, Sarah, she joined our live. She said, if we don't go down rabbit holes, are we even real writers? And that is so true. I have gone down so many unnecessary rabbit holes for longer than I needed to, right?
You have to follow the rabbit, white or otherwise. Right?
Right. So, with that kind of folklore you talked about, there's a lot of different, and I've looked a little into werewolf folklore myself because it's so fascinating, and it kind of seems like different parts of the country even have their own, like you said, Hollywood kind of brings in a whole realm of things.
Yes.
Was there a specific part of the folklore that you leaned more in towards? Did you kind of create your own with snippets of each, or how did you kind of build that?
Sure. I took the parts that I felt lent themselves best to telling the story I wanted to and exploring the issues I wanted to. And for me, the werewolf really kind of called a sort of a metaphor for dealing with trauma and repressed anger and emotions that you detach yourself from and compartmentalize too long, and what can happen when that is something that you resort to as a way of coping with negative, if that's a thing, feelings. And then, I also just like the supernatural element and went all nuts with that because I'm a nerd. So,
I love that. That's amazing. And just kind of talking more, kind of sticking with that werewolf a little bit. if you're writing from the perspective of a canine, did you have to do any
Mm.
special research for that?
Lots of butt sniffing. No, I'm sorry. No, no. Um, Yes, definitely, because the werewolf thing lends itself to very different sensory experiences. I thought that's my because I love when writing. What do you focus on as far as senses go? If you're doing TV or movies, the visual medium is pretty much what you have to nail yourself to. Sound to an extent, but that's pretty much all you have. But as a writer, you can immerse yourself in any of the senses, and
Mm.
that was something I really reflected on. So obviously, as a canine or canine persuaded type person, I guess in this scenario, I wanted to emphasize other senses. So this vision part, not so much. In fact,
Mm.
you might know that dogs have a kind of color blindness, and going down that rabbit hole, seeing what they might see compared to what we see, was a really big wake up call in terms of okay, no reds, no greens,
Yeah.
just sort of a weird mustard gray where those are concerned, but really amp up the smells and the sounds,
Mm.
which I'm a little on the hypervigilant side myself with my own issues. And so the idea of little sounds just constantly making you go, squirrel, is something I can really channel into the character pretty naturally.
Wonderful. And you and I have talked a little bit about this book before, and so I know that music played a really big part in this story. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
As previously stated, having grown up in the 90s, it is therefore the best time period
It's
there is.
the
I
best
think
music.
yeah, I mean, you can't really argue it.
For
No,
sure.
but I think we all have a bias towards the music of our young adulthood, right? And so I centered myself musically in that grunge Pacific Northwest mid 90s vibe. And I have this conceit with the story that as the memoir that's being written in universe is sort of compiled, there's a third character who is in the book who's reading it and organizing it and putting these labels on it. I don't think Frank himself goes around listening to Nirvana and Soundgarden. I mean, he's a guy from the Prohibition era. It's not really his vibe. But the person who's editing this together for him is, and that's the thing. There's a teenage character in the story as well, and she's of the nosy type and would very much put her nose in this business and scribble notes. So that's how I think of it. So a younger person at that time thinks of it in these terms. What's really tricky for me is I got in the pattern of naming every section or chapter after a song, but I made sure that the song itself was applicable to the time period that the setting was in, as well as the title applying to what's happening in that chapter, which is already tricky.
Yeah.
But then you go back about 70, 80 years, and it'd be one thing if I was going back to the 60s or something. I could play that game. But what was the number one hit in
Yeah.
1917? Like something you play at home on your piano to your grandma. A lot of World War I, go and get your gun boys kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and that was a harder dig.
I bet. Yeah, yeah. I love that. Sarah commented, what a cool idea, which I agree, which is why I wanted to have you talk a little bit about it.
It sounds
Um,
cool, and then you marry yourself to it, and
yeah,
you realize like, oh no, I'm looking forward
right.
to the sequel. I can jump back to the
Once
40s
you
or something.
commit,
Yeah.
you're like, uh-oh. That's very cool. Um, so on the other side of things, this story also really does dive into some real like deeper topics, like trauma, PTSD, depression. Can you talk a little bit more about this and how these deeper topics play a big role in your story?
Yes. Yeah, I saw the book included today on a very lovely bit of promotion for Cozy Reads, and I'm thinking like, it's a read. I don't
It's
know.
something.
There's the kind of cozy where you're just depressed and in your trauma and other than a blanket somewhere in a dark corner. That's cozy too. And
It
it might be a
depends on
challenging
your
read.
version of cozy, I guess.
Yeah. Like I said, the werewolf thing seemed like a great metaphor to channel some personal therapy about trauma and how to deal with repressed pain and anger, and I'm a veteran myself and have my own history with head trauma actually. And so a lot of this was a very personal story for me, and that's not always easy. It does deal with depression and some mental illness and suicidality and PTSD. So if that's a triggering thing for any reader out there, know that going in, or maybe don't go in if it's not for you. But there is definitely a strong thread in this about, fighting the suicidal urge.
Yeah, yeah. And I like that you mentioned, these are some triggers and reader, kind of keep your eye on those things, take care of your own mental health,
Absolutely.
obviously, when diving into a book like this. Along with that, kind of knowing the triggers and things like that, is there anything else that you want readers to know before diving into this story?
Sure. Well, Sarah has another question. So, what are some
Oh,
tropes and what's the spice level? Oh boy, spice. I don't get graphic with the spice. That is a thing that I had to be very thoughtful of because I'm a werewolf fan. I was digging into this as a metaphor to deal with my stuff, like I said. And when I started looking for contemporary werewolf novels, most of it is sort of like a fated mate thing, where like, oh, we're meant to be, but I don't want to, but I have to, and oh, it's so hot, and so that wasn't really what I was going for, and no shade on that at all. It's obviously a very hot, pun intended, uh, you know, genre right now, and
yes.
all more power to it. But it wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking for a little bit more of that horror noir hard boiled vibe. So I do play up the hard boiled tropes quite a bit. If you've read any Raymond Chandler, I hope you feel like it's familiar territory when you're in the first chapter. There's a lot of that. It was a cold and rainy day when she walked in. That kind of vibe is how I open with, and I have fun with it. I do like to make fun of myself and take the piss, as our friends across the pond would say. And I don't take myself too seriously, although the topics themselves are pretty serious. The spice is there. There is definitely a love story, especially in the past. There's a heartbreak element to it, and promiscuity in the 19 teens is a little different than it is now, but still,
Very
it's something
true.
that's dealt with. And there's sexual content, but it's not graphic. It's more like fade to black kind of moments.
Mm, wonderful.
Mm.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great question, by the way. Um, so like I said, is there anything else that you want readers to know before picking up this story, or
Oh,
anything that you feel like you want to preface it with?
sure. Decided just yesterday, as a matter of fact, being Veterans Day on Monday, and being that it deals
Yes.
so very much with veterans trauma and mental health, I've decided that all the proceeds that I get, 100% of my profits, during the month of November in honor of Veterans Day, will go directly to the organization that I support called Stop Soldier Suicide. So if you want to do a good thing and buy a book at the same time, because sometimes we have to choose, and let's be honest, the books usually win. This time you can do both, and know that your money is going towards something positive.
Wow, that's really amazing. And speaking of it being Veterans Day coming up, and I know that you yourself served, thank you for your service. Happy early Veterans Day. That's a really amazing thing to do. And like he said earlier, readers, if you are looking into this book, make sure that you do check those trigger warnings. But I know that it deals with a lot of heavy topics, but a lot of also really important topics.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that you don't shy away from that. And I like that, if nothing else, you highlight it even more by, like you said, donating those proceeds to those
Yeah.
foundations, because it's so, so important.
Thank you.
Um,
Ultimately, it's a werewolf book. It's all about what happens when we get too
right.
triggered, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true. Wonderful. What can readers expect next from you? Are you working on anything?
I am working on the follow up. This particular set of characters, I didn't necessarily know this going in, but yeah, the way I formatted it with being set in 95 and flashing back to a certain era and introducing other characters that, now have so much more to explore, this is easily at least a trilogy if I don't turn it into just an ongoing series where I skip maybe a year or two in the modern era and then maybe a generation in the past era, so we can
Yeah.
find ourselves in the 40s while dealing with new hits from 97 or something like that.
I love that. That's awesome. And you mentioned that you're getting an audiobook made out of this. Where can readers find that audiobook when it is completed?
That will be on Audible eventually. In the meantime, I expect before the release on Tuesday to have at least the first chapter, maybe the first few, already mastered and on my YouTube page as sort of a free teaser. So please do feel
Wow.
free to tune in to my golden words and the dulcet tones of my friend Mr. Volner, who is doing an amazing job so far reading it.
That's awesome. Amazing. So speaking of that, where can readers find you online and keep up
Good
with you?
question. Well, my name is pretty distinctive. um, it's sort of a family curse. Well, werewolf joke, half intended. But you can find me really easily just searching for EC Saulness on pretty much any platform, whether it's TikTok or YouTube or Facebook or any of those. I'm there. I'm hard to miss.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yes, readers, please reach out, find EC Solness. Like he said, Instagram here. His profile. But also check him out on YouTube and get a sneak peek of the pack audio version. That's very cool. And don't forget to buy the pack on Tuesday, November 12th. Like he said, one, it's just a new book. We love books, but also the proceeds are going to a really, really good cause. There it is. I love the cover with the wolves. And I noticed the little tagline on it, the strength of the wolf is the pack, which that's from one of my favorite poems. Our family says that poem to each other every
Perfect.
night. It's kind of our little good night thing. So I thought that was really cool. So
My book opens with that poem in its entirety. I give full credit where it's due to Mr. Kipling. And hearing my reader, Aaron Volner, read that this morning, I got that audio file. I'm like, oh man, you make it sound so cool. So, but it's also a key message for mental health, especially with the veterans thing. If you're feeling
yes,
like self-harm is a thing, isolation is a big part of that. And that the idea of a lone wolf is kind of a sad thing.
yes,
And finding your pack is pretty key to getting through things. And that's really what the story is about when it comes down to it. Not to spoil anything, but
yes. No, no, I love that. I love the symbolism of it and kind of joining those two worlds. And while tackling some really heavy, heavy topics with that supernatural element to kind of make it fun, because reading should still be fun, but
yeah, fun.
thought provoking as well. Yeah, fun, cozy.
Yeah, yeah, cozy, snug.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I apologize about the audio
It's me.
issues, but I am so, so glad. No, it's okay. I'm so glad that we got it figured out. We were able to chat.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share, Eric, before we close out
No,
here?
I just apologize too. I don't even have the excuse of being a 100-year-old Luddite to blame it on. I just messed it up. So thank you for
No,
making it
no,
work.
you're totally fine. All right. Well, don't forget November 12th, the pack comes out. And Eric, hopefully we chat again soon. This was really lovely. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right.